indeed. Take this mic, yes. So this is another piece of the puzzle, basically. And we're going deeper into the subject matter. I think this morning we covered very much the concepts around governance protected areas. We looked at the different types of protected areas, went really much into detail into discussion on that with all these fantastic examples, who shows that it can be very complex in the application, but it's always good to think about it because it triggers so many interesting thoughts and so many interesting discussions to try and fit these things together. And Grazia also mentioned briefly this morning in her overview presentation the dimension of governance quality, that there's certain criteria who were derived from the international level that one can apply to protected areas. So we basically have these two dimensions. We have the type of protected area governance, and then we have the quality of protected area governance, if you want. So I'm going to go now a little bit deeper into the second part, into the quality of protected area governance. And then I will, in a second step, talk a bit about the systems level of protected areas. We talked about individual protected areas here with a lot of examples, and I just wanted to give you a brief overview of some thinking around the systems level. Before then, after coffee break, Grazia goes into the assessment method for both levels, actually. And again, at any time, feel free to interrupt, feel free to shout out examples, questions, comments on what is coming up here. Okay. So, there's a whole different set, there's different sets of criteria, let's put it that way, that are floating around in the world of international cooperation, development policy. Some were coined by UNDP, and I think those are the ones that were closest to some were defined by the bank, the World Bank. There's sort of overlaps and differences, and there's, I think, different philosophies in terms of what these principles, what the set of principles should be. What we've been discussing a lot amongst ourselves is that there are these international criteria, and we do think that most of it transcends boundaries and probably transcends cultures also, but that when you do this exercise, when you look at governance principles that you want to achieve in a certain context, then it is worth looking into, there are other principles that are applicable to this particular local situation, to this particular cultural context, this particular national context. You could look at the constitution of the country, for example, if you're looking at the national level. You could look at certain principles within a community at the local level that need to be achieved, and it could go way beyond these 5 principles that I'm going to outline here that we're agreed on at the international level. And when we move on to the last part of our day today, you'll see there's a couple of instruments and tools that we want to present to you. One of them is something that we devised in the context of these guidelines, which is a set of questions to ask about each and every one of these principles to try and see how a protected area performs against these. Again, we talked about this yesterday. It's not yet sort of an evaluation measurable sort of instrument, but it helps in evaluating more or less how a protected area is performing against these principles. So just to go through these principles, the first one that's important is legitimacy in voice, and within it there's several elements. One of them is talking about how entitlements get created to take decisions, and to make sure that the governing system rests on socially sanctioned entitlements, that people feel socially that this is acceptable, that this entitlement is acceptable. Another element is to ensure that all rights holders and stakeholders are properly informed, that they genuinely get to participate in the decision making, and that their voice is being heard in the decisions. There's an element of promoting mutual respect amongst rights holders and stakeholders who are engaged in the governance. There's an element of maintaining active dialogue and consensus orientation towards solutions. and to make sure that the rules that are agreed upon are respected because they're owned by the people, because people feel that they had a say in putting up these rules, and not just because there's a fear of persecution, of repression in the worst cases, but that these are really the rules of everyone who was involved. The second principle that there is the principle of direction. And so this has to do, on one end, with a vision, to say this protected area, this system protected area, is a consistent vision there of where we want to be at, what goals we want to achieve, and both in the sort of short-term operational, but also in the long-term perspective. What are we setting out to do? And that this vision be consistently followed, that it be grounded in ecological, historical, social, cultural realities, that it makes sense to the context, basically, and again, that it be carried by the actors that are involved. And then another element of this principle of direction is to ensure coherence and compatibility, meaning that the governance of the protected area, the management decision, etc., be integrated into the local context, that they again be adapted to the realities that are there, and that they be compatible with plans and policies on other levels. We talked about the broader landscape, so this has to do with things like land use planning. Is the management of the protected area integrated into the larger planning of the landscape? Is it integrated with policies that affect it, etc., etc.? The third principle that we retained is the principle of performance. So here we're talking about achieving these set conservation goals, to make sure that they are monitored over time, and to make sure that basically this is where governance joins management on a few levels, that there be management effectiveness mechanism that makes sure that these conservation objectives are met and are monitored. To make sure that the system is responsive, that it adapts to changing conditions, but it also take into account the needs of the rights holders and stakeholders, that if there is an expressed need of a group that's involved in the governance of this protected area, that the system be able to take this into account and to respond to it, and that it not be rigid in terms of excluding those needs. Then of course there's the aspect of efficiency, and this is as much financial efficiency, making wise use of available financial resources, but also human resources. Make sure that there's institutional and human capacity there to take the decisions and implement them. Then financial sustainability in general, obviously, is also part of this, which, as we all know, can be a challenge in many protected areas, especially state-protected areas where the brunt of the burden is often with public institutions. And the last aspect of this performance principle is that the management regime be robust and resilient in the face of change, that if conditions change in the area, if conditions change in the frameworks around the conditions around the protected area, that these institutions be flexible enough and strong enough that they're able to adapt. For example, if there's conflict in the area, in the country, I mean, those are extreme scenarios, obviously, which in the worst case can completely disrupt the functioning of a protected area. And yet, if you have flexible, resilient systems, they can bounce back and adapt to changing conditions. Next principle is accountability. And this is about ensuring the accountability of all decision makers to the public. And accountability means that it be clear what the lines of responsibility and reporting are, that it be clear how the decision makers are accountable to their public, how they have to show that they're performing, that they're implementing the decisions that we're jointly taking, etc. And that it be clear how reporting works, how the information flows to the people that they are accountable to. Then there's the upholding of the integrity and commitment of all decision makers. So this goes a lot also then it starts going also into personal capacities of decision makers, but also of institutions. That there be avenues to demand accountability if there is an issue, if involved stakeholders feel that there is something that hasn't been met, that they have avenues where they can demand that the decision maker be accountable to them, and to make sure that this accountability is linked to concrete and appropriate rewards and sanctions. Basically, it not just be that there are goals and commitments set out, but that it be kind of clear that if these are not met, if the decision maker is not going to be accountable, or is not going to be meeting the tasks that were set out for them to do, that there be a system to reward this and to sanction, obviously, inaccountable behavior. The last element that I wanted to present is this element of fairness. And we've talked about this morning. There were several examples of benefit sharing the costs and the benefits of protected areas. So striving towards equity in decision making, but also in terms of the opportunity costs that people have for example, being excluded from the certain use of resources. Will this be compensated? If a protected area generates benefits through tourism, through other means, how will these benefits be distributed, etc. Another aspect is the very basic maintenance of the rule of law, without which a lot of things will just be on paper. And as we know, there's a lot of good legislation out there, there's a lot of good management plans out there. But what happens if there are violations of rules and there is no sanctions behind them and there is nobody to enforce them? It becomes very difficult. So it's necessary that they be enforced, and enforced impartially. That's also very important, that there not be preferential treatment of certain elements of society against others, and that the legal frameworks themselves be fair. Another thing is, making sure public service promotions are merit-based, meaning that basically this is talking about avoiding corruption in the system in terms of how this is set up and how people sort of climb the ladder within these institutions, which can be very important in terms of incentive and disincentive of actions. Make sure that conflict management is taken seriously, that there be timely competent support for effective conflict management processes. And finally, if these conflict management processes fail, that there be access to justice for the people who feel that they have been wronged, that there be legal assistance, ideally for those who have a little bit of a weaker role in the legal system, and that be avenues towards impartial judgment available to everyone that participates in these governance arrangements. So this was the part about the quality of protected areas, the criteria for good governance, so to say, for protected areas. Are there any questions regarding to this bit at this point? Vincent?
Well, it's not really a question, in fact. Yeah. Well, in fact, it's not really a question. This morning we present where does this principle come from? It's 1948 Declaration of the Human Rights. It's something fundamental, historical moment in the history of the world after the huge, the tremendous war, the Second World War. But it's an historical moment in which people congregate and decide some rules, some fair aspect of human rights. But it's a Western conception of rights. So it's nice, it was a moment in time, it's very big improvement in the rights of the people. But for example, we're not talking about cosmovisions. So sticking to this principle is a limitation. What is important? What's important behind that is that we have to have principles. So I recommend to practitioners, I define myself as a practitioner, we have to return back to ethics and to think about how to talk about ethics with communities, stakeholders, administrations. This is really the base, because this is the base of the moral value shape rules shape governance. So it's just that really don't get stuck to this principle. It's nice. Here there is maybe 8. After in another document in the UICM there is 9. Tomorrow there is 12. So this is not that important. It's to get what are the improvements in terms of human rights and fairness.
Ethics. Yeah, thank you very much. I think it is a very good point, and as I mentioned before, and we say so in the guidelines, it is really crucial to do this exercise of agreeing on principles before you set out to measure them, because you have to make sure that people, own up these principles, and they might be different in a cultural context. That's absolutely right. I think there's a certain value with international standards that make it sort of comparable, and in a document like this, you have to start somewhere in terms of setting this out. But it's a good point, and we might want to rethink a little bit the way we present in terms of this ethics component. But I think it's a crucial point. I'm going to go rather quickly because we have to go to coffee break. Otherwise, there's no more cookies for anyone. So just to look at this aspect of really the system now of protected areas, and Grazia outlined it this morning also in the presentation, where these components of the system are and what's out of the system could be part of the system, etc. So when is a system of protected areas a good system of protected areas, let's say? It's ideally complete, which means that it protects all the key ecosystem and species that are found in the country or in the region, which a lot of countries have had to conduct gap analyses, for example, to report to the CBD, etc., to see which ecosystems were missing. It conserves biodiversity and its associated natural and cultural resources, also sometimes called ecosystem services, etc. I mean, there's a whole terminology story here, but basically that you don't just look at the species per se, but you look at this in a broader context and how they serve also purposes, and that it be biologically, ecologically well connected, that there be corridors between the protected areas, that you have a mosaic in the landscape where species can migrate, etc., and which can mean to look into where are the gaps so disruptive that you need restoration. You need to look into transboundary aspects also, of course. I mean, a few examples were mentioned here. So these basically are some of these things that would show you, okay, we have a protected area system that's functioning, is doing what it set out to do, which is protecting the set of biological, ecological, etc. resources of a particular place. But what it also means, if we look at the protected area system also from a social point of view, not just from the ecological point of view, ideally the system would be socially and culturally welcome, which means that society will stand behind the system of protected areas, they will stand behind the individual protected areas, they will perceive that the system is managed and owned by all the actors jointly. I mean, I'm really going into the ideal here, but certainly this is something to strive for. And that it's so integrated with the benefits that it provides to society, which are numerous, as we all know, that people really perceive that is part of this fabric. It should be cost effective, because, I mean, it's here in the workshops and in the corridors, everywhere, financing of protected areas, big thing, where do we find the money for all these protected areas? So yes, it is an issue. Resources are not infinite, and definitely it should be as cost effective as possible. And some might argue that, giving people the rights to manage their own resources might be a very cost effective thing to do, but there we go. It should be flexible and secure. I mentioned this before. In the face of changes, for example, global change, climate change, etc., it should be able to adapt itself also and to be resilient in the face of changes. And so where does government come into that? How can what we've been discussing here help to achieve both on the ecological, biological level and on the social level, the performance of such a system of protected areas? So here's an example a little bit of working with the matrix, and the method is outlined in the guidelines. The example is mentioned in the guidelines, and Volo is here in the room. And I almost want to give her the floor right now, but we're so late behind that I'm just going to run over this relatively quickly. And Volo's here amongst us, so for all of them, all those who want to know more about it. But basically, this is the situation of what kind of protected areas were legally recognized under the protected area system in Madagascar. Very classical. In a lot of countries that's the case. Only government protected areas were officially recognized. You had, the strict protected areas, and then the ones that were national parks, and then you also had recognition of protected landscapes. And then Durban rolled around, the last World Parks Congress, and under the influence of a lot of factors, the president of Madagascar stands up and says, we're going to increase the coverage of protected areas in Madagascar by how many? 600 million.